The lawyer slid the inheritance papers across the table and said, "If you sign here, your brother receives the entire estate." My hand stopped above the page. Across from me, my brother Daniel leaned back in his chair, already wearing the expression of someone who had won. "You don't have to make this difficult, Mara," he said quietly. "Dad always wanted the family to stay together." I almost laughed. Dad had been dead for 6 days. And, somehow, Daniel had already divided everything he left behind. The house, the company's shares, the savings, even the old vineyard that had belonged to our grandfather. Everything except one thing. Me. I looked at the signature line. In my previous life, I had fought for every inch of that inheritance. I had hired lawyers. I had gathered documents. I had confronted Daniel. I had begged my mother to remember the promises our father made. I had believed that if I proved the truth, my family would finally understand that Daniel had betrayed us. I had been wrong, because I had already lived this life once. And I knew exactly what Daniel would do with the inheritance. He would sell the company within 2 years. He would borrow against the house. He would gamble away the vineyard. And when the money disappeared, he would blame me. Then, when I refused to give him more, he would destroy the one thing I'd spent my whole life protecting. My father's name. That was how my first life ended. Not with a dramatic murder. Not with some grand tragedy. It ended in a hospital room, with me staring at a ceiling I could barely see while Daniel stood beside my bed and whispered, "You should have just given me what Dad left." Then everything went dark, and when I opened my eyes again, I was 29 years old, 3 months before my father's death. At first, I thought it was a dream. Then I saw the calendar. I saw my father's handwriting on the kitchen whiteboard. I heard Daniel laughing downstairs, and I realized I had been given something I never believed I deserved, a chance to make different choices. So when the lawyer asked me to sign away my inheritance, I did not feel afraid. I felt tired, because I already knew the ending of the story if I continued fighting. And this time, I had no intention of following Daniel to the grave. I picked up the pen. Daniel's smile widened. My mother, seated beside him, whispered, "Mara, are you sure?" I looked at her. In my previous life, I had spent years trying to win back her love. This time, I simply smiled. Yes. The pen touched the paper. And for the first time in my life, I let my brother have exactly what he wanted. He just didn't know what it would cost him. The lawyer looked surprised. "You understand that by signing this, you're giving up your claim to the majority of your father's estate?" "I understand." Daniel exhaled in relief. "Finally," he murmured. I heard it. That single word told me everything. He had never wanted peace. He had wanted surrender. I signed. Then I pushed the papers toward him. "Congratulations, Daniel." His fingers closed around them, and I watched him smile at the inheritance he had spent years believing belonged to him. He had no idea that I was already planning my exit, nor did he know that before I died the first time, I had discovered something hidden inside my father's company. Something Daniel had never known existed. Something that would change everything. But I wasn't going to tell him. Not yet. The strangest thing about remembering a life you had already lived was realizing how many moments you had once considered important that now felt meaningless. 3 weeks before my father's death, Daniel had called me into his office. In my previous life, I had gone there believing he wanted to reconcile. This time, I knew better. He closed the door and smiled. "You've been handling Dad's investment accounts, right?" "Yes." "Then I need you to transfer some money." I looked up from my laptop. "How much?" $200,000. I almost smiled. In my first life, that request had been the beginning. I had refused because the money belonged to the company. Daniel had become furious. He accused me of humiliating him. Then he told our mother that I was secretly stealing from Dad. She believed him. That lie had eventually turned everyone against me. So this time, I didn't argue. "Okay." Daniel blinked. "Okay. I'll transfer it." His suspicion disappeared immediately. "See? I knew you understood." I nodded, but I did not transfer a cent. Instead, I forwarded his request to the company's financial auditor. Then I quietly copied every document related to the company's accounts. Not to hurt Daniel, to protect myself. That evening, I visited my father. He was sitting in the garden, wrapped in a gray sweater, staring at the old apple tree. For a moment, I forgot everything. I was 12 again. Daniel was 14. Dad had caught us stealing apples from the neighbor's tree. Daniel had immediately pointed at me. She made me do it. Dad had laughed so hard he could barely speak. I remembered running behind the house while Daniel chased me, both of us laughing. Those memories hurt more now than the betrayal, because they had been real. Daniel had once been the person I trusted most. I sat beside Dad. "Are you worried about the company?" I asked. He looked at me. "Why?" "Nothing." He studied my face for several seconds. "You've changed." My heart tightened. "Have I?" "You're quieter." I looked at the apple tree. Maybe I'm finally listening. He smiled faintly. Then he reached into his pocket and handed me an old brass key. I stared at it. "What is this?" "Something I should have given you years ago." "What does it open?" "You'll know when you need it." In my previous life, he had never given me that key. Or perhaps he had tried. I couldn't remember. That night, I placed it inside the bottom drawer of my desk. I didn't touch it again. 2 weeks later, my father collapsed. The hospital lights were painfully bright. Daniel arrived 20 minutes after the ambulance. He wasn't alone. His business partner, Victor, was with him. I recognized Victor immediately. In my previous life, Victor had helped Daniel drain the company. And now I knew something else. Victor was the reason Daniel had wanted the $200,000. The first time around, I had discovered that too late. This time, I simply watched them whisper outside Dad's room. Daniel glanced through the glass and saw me watching. He walked over. "Mara, we need to talk." "No." His eyebrows rose. "About Dad." I said no. He lowered his voice. "You don't understand what's happening." "I understand perfectly." For the first time, fear flickered across his face. Only for a second. Then it disappeared. My father died the next morning. And 6 days later, I signed away my inheritance. Daniel thought that was the end of our conflict. He was wrong. It was the moment I finally stopped fighting him. Because while he was celebrating what he had won, I was preparing to build a life where I would never need to fight him again. 3 days after I signed away my inheritance, Daniel moved into my father's house. He didn't ask. He simply arrived with 2 trucks and a dozen boxes. I stood on the front steps as movers carried Dad's furniture through the doorway. Daniel noticed me and grinned. "You should take whatever personal things you want." I looked at him. "Whatever I want. Within reason." That phrase almost made me laugh. Within reason. In my first life, he had said the same thing before throwing away my mother's photographs. I had spent 2 years trying to recover them. This time, I didn't care about the furniture. I cared about something else. My father's study. "I'm taking Dad's notebooks," I said. Daniel frowned. "Those old things." "Yes." "Fine." He waved his hand. "You always liked his boring stuff." I nodded. I did. I didn't tell him that those notebooks contained years of handwritten ideas, financial observations, engineering sketches, and notes about the company's research division. Daniel had never read them. He thought my father was an old-fashioned businessman. I knew better. Dad had always been an inventor first. The family company, Halden Instruments, had started with a small workshop and one machine my grandfather built himself. Over the years, Dad had turned it into a respected manufacturer of precision equipment. But in his final years, he had quietly been working on something new. A compact energy storage system designed for remote medical equipment. The project had never been completed, or so everyone believed. I knew it had been completed. Because in my first life, 6 months after Dad died, I discovered a prototype hidden in the old workshop. Daniel had dismissed it as worthless. I hadn't. I had spent years trying to develop it. But by then, I was trapped under Daniel's control. He owned the company. He controlled the money. And every time I made progress, he demanded I work on projects that brought him quick profits. Eventually, he sold the research division. The prototype disappeared. This time, I wasn't going to let that happen. That evening, I drove to the old workshop. The building stood behind the main factory, covered in dust and weeds. I unlocked the door. Inside, everything smelled like metal, oil, and old wood. My childhood memories returned immediately. Dad teaching me how to use a screwdriver. Daniel sitting on the workbench, pretending to understand what Dad was explaining. Me laughing when Daniel dropped a box of screws. I stood there for a long moment. Then I remembered the brass key. I pulled it from my pocket. At the back of the workshop was an old steel cabinet. I had never noticed the tiny keyhole before. My hand trembled as I inserted the key. Click! The cabinet opened. Inside was a black metal case. On top was a note. My name was written across it. Mara. I sat on the floor. My fingers shook as I opened the case. Inside were 3 notebooks, a flash drive, and a sealed envelope. I opened the envelope first. There were only 4 lines. If you're reading this, I've probably run out of time. Don't let anyone tell you this project is worthless. You understood it better than I ever did. Finish what I couldn't. I stared at the words until they blurred. Dad had known. Somehow he had known. The flash drive contained technical files. But the most important thing was not the invention itself. It was a licensing agreement. Dad had quietly filed the core patent under a private research entity that listed me as the sole successor. Not Daniel. Not the family company. Me. I sat in the dark workshop and finally understood why Dad had given me the key. He hadn't wanted me to fight Daniel over the inheritance. He had wanted me to build something that couldn't be taken from me. I cried that night, not because I had inherited something valuable, because my father had believed in me when I had spent most of my life believing that I needed my family to believe in me first. I packed the notebooks. Then I locked the workshop. The next morning, I submitted my resignation from Halden Instruments. Daniel called me within 10 minutes. What are you doing? Leaving. You can't just leave. I already did. You're abandoning Dad's company? No, I said quietly. I'm abandoning the part of my life where I keep trying to save something that doesn't want to be saved. There was silence. Then Daniel laughed. You'll come back. I looked out my apartment window. I won't. He didn't believe me. That was his mistake. I rented a tiny office across town. It had cracked windows, an unreliable elevator, and a heating system that sounded like it was preparing for war. I loved it. For the first time, every decision inside those 4 walls belonged to me. I named the company Northstar Energy Systems. There was no grand launch, no investors waiting outside, no newspaper articles. Just me, an old laptop, Dad's notebooks, and a problem that refused to be solved easily. The first prototype failed after 11 hours. The second overheated. The third barely held enough energy to power a medical monitor for a full day. I threw my pencil across the room. Then I remembered Dad. Whenever I complained in the workshop, he would say, "Failure is just expensive information." I laughed to spite myself. Fine, Dad. I picked up the pencil. Give me more information. Weeks passed. Daniel called often at first. I stopped answering. Then he began sending messages. Mom wants you to come for dinner. We need to discuss your father's belongings. You can't disappear like this. I deleted them. Not because I hated him, because every reply would reopen a door I had finally closed. Meanwhile, Northstar slowly became real. I hired one engineer, Priya, who had been laid off by a larger company after questioning a flawed battery design. During our first meeting, she looked at my prototype. You built this? Yes. She examined the wiring. This is either very clever or completely insane. Which one? She smiled. I haven't decided. That was how our partnership began. For months, we worked until midnight. Sometimes we failed. Sometimes we argued. Once, we spent 11 days chasing a problem that turned out to be one faulty sensor. But slowly, the system improved. Then one afternoon, a regional hospital contacted us. They had heard about our prototype through a medical technology conference. They wanted to test it in rural clinics where power outages were common. I almost refused. We weren't ready. Priya looked at me. That's what everyone says before their first real opportunity. So we accepted. The trial changed everything. The system ran for 36 hours, then 48, then 3 full days. A week later, the hospital director called. Mara, do you understand what this could mean? I looked at the prototype sitting on our workbench. Yes, but I don't think I really did. Not until the first purchase order arrived. Then another. Then another. Within a year, Northstar had moved into a proper facility. I still kept Dad's notebooks in my desk. I never forgot where I had started. Meanwhile, Daniel's world was beginning to crack. I learned about it from a former employee. He called me one evening. Daniel sold the old research division. I closed my eyes. I know. He also borrowed against the main property. I said nothing. And there's something else. What? He's been asking about you. My grip tightened around the phone. Why? He says he needs to know where Dad's research files went. I looked at the black metal case on my desk. They aren't his. I know. The employee hesitated. Mara, he's in trouble. I took a slow breath. I hope he finds his way out. You're not going to help? No. There was silence. Then he asked, not even your brother? I looked through the office window. Priya was laughing with the engineering team. The company was alive. My life was alive. I finally understood something I had never understood before. Helping someone didn't mean allowing them to keep hurting you. I helped him for 29 years, I said. Now, I'm going to help myself. That night, I received an email from a company I had never heard of. They wanted to acquire Northstar. The offer was enormous. I read it twice. Then, I saw the name of the investment group behind it. Victor Hale Capital. Victor, Daniel's old business partner. My stomach dropped. I opened the attachment. The final page contained one sentence that made my blood run cold. We believe your technology would complement assets currently controlled by Halden Instruments. I stared at the screen. Daniel had finally realized what I had built. And he wasn't coming back because he missed his sister. He was coming back because he had finally discovered what he had thrown away. I did not answer Victor's offer. Instead, I printed it and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk. Priya noticed. You look like you've just seen a ghost. Something like that. She picked up the document. Victor Hale. Yes. Isn't he connected to Halden Instruments? He used to be. She looked at me carefully. And Daniel. I nodded. Priya didn't ask anything else. She had learned that there were parts of my past I only discussed when I was ready. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the sentence in Victor's proposal. Your technology would complement assets currently controlled by Halden Instruments. That wasn't an investment offer. It was a trap disguised as an opportunity. In my first life, Daniel had always been good at making other people's ambitions sound like his own ideas. He knew how to smile. He knew how to apologize. He knew how to make people believe he was simply misunderstood. And I had spent years defending him. Then I remember the hospital. The final night of my previous life. Daniel had stood beside my bed, furious because I had refused to sign over the last property I owned. You're still fighting me? He had asked. I had barely been able to speak. I trusted you. He had looked away. I gave you chances. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was true, because he genuinely believed it. He believed every sacrifice I made for him had been his generosity. The next morning, I declined Victor's offer. He called immediately. Mara, I think you've misunderstood. I haven't. Your company is growing quickly. You need capital. We already have enough. You could become a major international company. We intend to. He paused. Then his voice changed. Daniel was hoping you might consider a family partnership. I smiled without humor. There is no family partnership. You're still angry. No. That answer seemed to surprise him. Then why refuse? Because I know what happens when I mix business with people I don't trust. He hung up. 2 days later, Daniel called. I answered. Not because I wanted to hear him. Because I knew the conversation was coming. Mara. His voice sounded different. Less confident. Hello, Daniel. I heard you rejected Victor. Yes. You don't understand how much money you're leaving on the table. Understand. You always were stubborn. I almost laughed. He had used that word since we were children. When I refused to let him take my favorite toy, I was stubborn. When I stayed up all night helping Dad prepare documents, I was stubborn. When I refused to cover Daniel's mistakes at the company, I was stubborn. Apparently, independence looked like stubbornness to people who benefited from your obedience. Why did you call? He went silent. Then he said, I want to meet. No. Mara, please. That word surprised me. Daniel had never said please to me. Not sincerely. Why? I want to explain. You had years to explain. I know. You didn't. I was wrong. My fingers tightened around the phone. For a moment, I wanted to believe him. That was the dangerous part. Some wounds don't disappear just because you become stronger. You simply learn not to touch them. Goodbye, Daniel. I ended the call. The next morning, my mother came to Northstar. I hadn't seen her in nearly a year. She stood outside my office holding a small handbag, looking older than I remembered. When I opened the door, she stared at me. You look well. I am. She smiled sadly. I've missed you. I didn't know what to say, because I had missed her too. That was the truth. No amount of success erased that. She stepped inside. Daniel told me you were struggling. I almost smiled. I'm not. She looked around the office. At the employees. At the equipment. At the framed certificate from the hospital trial. Then she understood. You built all this? Yes. Without your father's company? Yes. She sat down slowly. I didn't know. I know. She lowered her eyes. I waited. I owe you an apology. The words should have made me happy. Instead, they made me tired. For what? For believing Daniel. I sat across from her. She wiped her eyes. He told me you were trying to take everything from him. I wasn't. I know that now. I looked at her. Mom, do you know what hurt the most? She shook her head. It wasn't losing the inheritance. Her eyes lifted. It was realizing that when Daniel told you I was stealing from Dad, you believed him without asking me. She began to cry. I didn't. I spent years trying to prove I was a good daughter. My voice remained calm. I don't need to prove that anymore. She reached for my hand. I let her touch it, but I didn't hold on. That was the difference. Before she left, she whispered, "Can we start over?" I looked at her for a long time. Maybe. It was the most I could give. Not forgiveness without boundaries. Not a return to the past. Just a possibility. After she left, Priya entered my office. You okay? I nodded. Then my phone rang. It was our legal counsel. Mara, you need to come downstairs. Why? There are people here from the Halden estate. My heart stopped. What do they want? He hesitated. They're claiming the patent belongs to the family. I walked into the conference room and saw 3 strangers sitting around the table. One was a lawyer. The second was an accountant. The third was Daniel. He stood when I entered. Mara, I didn't sit. What is this? The lawyer opened a folder. We've reviewed the patent documentation connected to your technology. And we believe there may be an ownership dispute. I looked at Daniel. He avoided my eyes. The lawyer continued. The original research was conducted using Halden Instruments facilities. Yes. Some early funding came from the company. Yes. Therefore, the company may have a claim. I almost laughed. May? Daniel finally spoke. I'm not trying to take anything from you. I looked at him. You've spent your entire life trying to take something from me. His jaw tightened. I know what Dad wanted. No. I shook my head. You know what you want. The lawyer interrupted. Let's keep this professional. Fine. I placed my father's letter on the table. This is professional. The lawyer read it. His expression changed. Then he examined the patent documents. He turned to Daniel. Were you aware of this private research entity? Daniel said nothing. The lawyer looked back at me. Who prepared these documents? My father. Before his death? Yes. And he specifically named you as successor? Yes. The room became silent. Daniel stared at the papers. You knew about this? I found it after Dad died. You hid it. No. You knew. I didn't know before Dad died. He stepped toward me. You knew after. Yes. And you still signed away the inheritance? Yes. His face went pale. Why? I finally looked directly into his eyes. Because I didn't want anything you had. He seemed unable to understand. You gave me the company. Yes. You gave me the house. Yes. You gave me the money. Yes. Why? I answered quietly. Because I knew what you'd do with it. His expression changed. For the first time, I saw fear. Not fear of losing money. Fear of realizing that I had known him better than he knew himself. He whispered, "What did you know?" I didn't answer. The lawyer gathered the documents. There is no basis for the claim, he said. Daniel stared at me. You planned this. No. Then what did you do? I left. That sentence hurt him more than any insult could have. Because there was nothing he could argue with. I had not sabotaged him. I had not exposed him. I had not taken revenge. I had simply stopped participating. He left without another word. 2 weeks later, the consequences began. Halden Instruments' debts became public. The loans Daniel had taken against the property were called in. The company could not meet its obligations. The board removed him as managing director. Victor disappeared, and investigators began examining the financial transfers that had once been hidden from me. I watched the news from my office. I felt no satisfaction, only sadness. The company my grandfather had built was being dismantled. Not because I had refused to save it, because Daniel had mistaken ownership for entitlement. That evening, I drove to my father's house. The front door was locked. A notice had been placed beside it. The bank had taken possession. I stood outside for several minutes. Then I noticed something. The old apple tree was still there. I remember Dad sitting beneath it. I remember Daniel beside me. For one brief moment, I could almost hear our childhood laughter. I closed my eyes. Goodbye, Dad. Then I walked away. I thought that was the end. It wasn't. The following month, Northstar received an invitation to present our technology at an International Medical Innovation Summit. Our system had passed every major field test. Investors wanted in. Hospitals wanted contracts. And for the first time, my name appeared on the cover of a business magazine. The headline read, "From a family workshop to a medical technology breakthrough. The woman who built Northstar alone." I stared at the photograph. I didn't recognize the woman in it. Not because she looked different, because she looked free. That evening, Priya brought champagne into the office. To Northstar, I smiled. To everyone who believed in it. She raised an eyebrow. Everyone. I looked around. At the beginning, there was only one person who believed. Your father? I shook my head. Me. It was the first time I had ever said it without feeling guilty. Then my phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother. I answered. Her voice trembled. Mara, what happened? Daniel wants to see you. I was silent. He says there's something he needs to tell you. What? She took a breath. He found Dad's last personal letter. My heart tightened. What letter? I don't know. Then she whispered the words that changed everything. He says Dad wrote that he regretted something about the inheritance. I closed my eyes. For the first time since leaving my family behind, I wondered whether my father had known more than I realized, and whether the inheritance I had surrendered was never really the thing he had wanted me to have. I met Daniel at a quiet cafe on the edge of the city. Not because I wanted to, because I needed to know what was in that letter. He was already there when I arrived. He looked older, not dramatically, just enough to show that the past year had finally caught up with him. His expensive suit was gone. His watch was gone. Even the confidence in his posture had disappeared. He stood when he saw me. You came. I said I would. He nodded. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he placed an envelope on the table. This is Dad's. I didn't touch it. Where did you find it? In the house. After the bank took possession? Yes. He pushed it toward me. I thought it was another document about the company. And I opened it. He looked down. It was addressed to you. My chest tightened. I picked up the envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable. Dad's. I opened it carefully. There were only 2 pages. Mara, if you found this letter, then I've probably failed to tell you something important while I was alive. You were always the one who believed family meant sacrificing yourself. I was proud of your loyalty, but I was also afraid of it. I stopped reading. My eyes burned. I continued. Your brother is talented, but he has spent too much of his life believing that being loved means being given what he wants. I tried to correct that. I failed. The inheritance was never meant to determine your worth. If Daniel receives the company, let him. If he asks you to stay, only stay if you want to. And if you leave, don't look back simply because you feel guilty. I lowered the letter. Daniel was watching me. He knew. I whispered. What? He knew what you would do. Daniel looked away. I think he did. I folded the letter. What else? There was a second page. I just read it. No. He shook his head. There was another document attached. He reached into his coat. I stared at the paper he placed on the table. It was a transfer agreement. My father's remaining private shares in Northstar's research entity. The entity had not merely named me as successor. Dad had already transferred his ownership to me before his death. The inheritance I had surrendered had never included it. He had deliberately separated it. Daniel stared at the document. I didn't know. I believe you. He looked surprised. You do? Yes. Why? Because if you had known, you would have fought much harder. His mouth tightened. You really think that little of me? I looked at him. I think I know you. That hurt. I could see it. But this time, I didn't rush to comfort him. Daniel took a slow breath. I destroyed everything. I didn't respond. I thought Dad favored you. He didn't. He trusted you. Yes. And I hated you for it. I looked down at the table. That was never my fault. I know. He rubbed his face. I thought if I had the company, I'd finally prove myself. Did you? No. His voice cracked. I lost it. I remained silent. Then he said something I never expected. I was jealous of you. I looked up. What? Because you could walk away. The words settled between us. Daniel continued. You always had something I didn't. What? Purpose. I had no answer. He laughed bitterly. I had money. I had a company. I had Dad's approval. But every time you built something yourself, I felt like I was losing. That wasn't a competition. I know that now. He stared at me. That's the worst part. For the first time, I saw my brother not as the person who had betrayed me, but as a damaged man who had spent years turning his insecurity into entitlement. Understanding him didn't erase what he had done, but it made forgiveness possible. Not reconciliation, forgiveness. Those were different things. I stood. Thank you for giving me the letter. He looked up. That's it. Yes. You're not going to help me? I paused. What do you want me to do? I don't know. Neither do I. He looked devastated. I softened my voice. Daniel, I can forgive you. His eyes lifted. But I can't become your safety net again. He nodded slowly. I understand. I wasn't sure he did. But for once, it wasn't my responsibility to make him understand. I left the cafe. Outside, the evening air felt strangely light. For years, I had imagined that confronting Daniel would feel powerful. It didn't. It felt quiet, almost ordinary. And that was how I knew I had finally healed. Northstar's international presentation took place 2 months later. I stood backstage while the screen behind me displayed the first field test of our system. 3 rural clinics, 700 patients, hundreds of hours of uninterrupted power, no emergency generators, no expensive fuel deliveries, just a small energy system that could keep essential medical equipment running. When my name was announced, I walked onto the stage. The applause was louder than I expected. For a second, I remembered the old workshop. Dusty windows, Dad's notebooks, my father's handwriting, the brass key, the inheritance papers, and Daniel saying, finally. I smiled, not because I had won, because I had stopped measuring my life by whether he lost. After the presentation, investors surrounded us. But one person waited at the edge of the crowd. Daniel. I hadn't expected him. He was thinner. He was wearing a simple dark jacket. He didn't approach until everyone else had left. You were incredible, he said. Thank you. He glanced at the stage. Dad would have been proud. I smiled faintly. I think so. I started working again. I looked at him. Where? A small logistics company. That sounds good. It is. He smiled. I don't manage anyone. That might be good for you. He laughed. I deserve that. I shook my head. I wasn't insulting you. I know. He looked around. Do you ever miss home? I thought about it. The house. The family. I didn't answer immediately. Then I said sometimes. Do you miss me? That was harder. Yes. His eyes became wet. But missing someone doesn't mean you should return to them. He nodded. I know. We stood silently. Then Daniel reached into his pocket. He handed me a small object. My old childhood keychain. A tiny wooden star. I stared at it. You kept this. I found it in one of Dad's boxes. I remembered it. Daniel had given it to me when I was 10. He had saved his lunch money for 2 weeks. At the time, I thought it was the most valuable gift in the world. I smiled. I thought it was lost. So did I. I closed my fingers around it. Thank you. He nodded. Then he walked away. I watched him disappear into the crowd. For the first time, I understood that closure didn't always come from dramatic apologies. Sometimes it came from 2 people finally accepting that the relationship they once had could not be rebuilt in its old shape. That night, I returned to my hotel. There was a message waiting. Not from Daniel. From Priya. Someone left a package at the office. I called her. What package? I don't know. It has your father's name on it. My heart began beating faster. Don't open it. I didn't. I'll be there tomorrow. The next morning, I found a wooden box sitting on my desk. No return address. Inside was an old photograph of my father standing beside the workshop. Behind him was a younger version of himself. And beside him, a woman I had never seen before. I turned the photograph over. There was writing on the back. The first prototype wasn't built in the workshop. Look where the story began. I stared at the words. Priya came closer. What does that mean? I don't know. But I did. Or at least I had a suspicion. My grandfather had started the family business in a tiny machine shop near the northern coast. That building had been sold decades ago. I had never visited it. In my first life, I had never cared. Now, I couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. Who was the woman? Why had Dad hidden the picture? And what did he mean by the first prototype? That afternoon, I booked a flight. I didn't tell Daniel. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't tell anyone in the family. For the first time, I was following a mystery that belonged entirely to me. When I arrived at the old coastal town, I found a machine shop exactly where Dad's notebooks said it had been. The building was abandoned. The windows were broken. The sign was almost unreadable. I pushed the door open. Dust floated through the sunlight. At the back was a workbench, and carved into the wood was a sentence. For the child who refuses to stop asking why. I touched the letters. My father's handwriting, but beneath it was another name. A name I recognized from the patent documents. The woman in the photograph wasn't a stranger. She was my father's former research partner. And according to the records, she had disappeared from the company 27 years earlier. I stood in that abandoned workshop, staring at her name. Then my phone rang. It was my lawyer. His voice was urgent. Mara, you need to come back. Why? Someone has filed a claim against Northstar. Who? He hesitated. Your father's former research partner. My heart sank. The past I thought I had escaped had just found another way back to me. I returned to the city the next morning. My lawyer, Elias, was waiting in the Northstar conference room with a stack of documents. Priya sat beside him. Neither of them looked relaxed. What exactly is she claiming? I asked. Elias pushed a folder toward me. Your father's former research partner is Dr. Evelyn Shaw. I recognize the name from the old records. She says the original energy storage design was jointly developed by her and your father. So, she claims your father transferred the intellectual property without her consent. I frowned. That doesn't make sense. It gets more complicated. Elias opened another document. Her legal team has evidence that she worked on the original prototype before leaving Halden Instruments. I looked at the photograph from the old workshop. The woman beside Dad. Evelyn. What happened to her? No one knows. Then find out. Elias hesitated. I already did. He handed me a report. Evelyn had left the company 27 years ago after a dispute with my father. She had moved overseas. She built a career in renewable energy. Then, 5 years ago, she returned to the country. She had never contacted Dad. Until now. I turned the page. There was an old letter. My father had written it. Evelyn had kept a copy. I know what I owe you, but if I give you what you ask for now, the company will collapse. I promise I will make it right. I looked at Elias. What did she ask for? He shook his head. That part is missing. I leaned back. For the first time, I wondered whether I had misunderstood my father's legacy. Perhaps he hadn't been the perfect man I remembered. Perhaps he had made mistakes. Serious ones. And perhaps the reason he gave me the patent wasn't because he believed I deserved it. Perhaps he was trying to repair something he had broken. That possibility hurt more than I expected. I spent the next week investigating. I contacted former employees. I read archived records. I reviewed every technical note in Dad's notebooks. Then I found something. A sentence written in the margin of an engineering diagram. Yes, solved the thermal problem. I only completed the storage architecture. Yes, Evelyn Shaw. The invention wasn't entirely Dad's. I closed the notebook. For years, I had thought my father had left me a gift. Now I realized he had left me a responsibility. I called Evelyn. She answered on the fourth ring. Mara. Yes. You found the notebook. Yes. There was silence. Then she said, your father finally told you. He should have. He was afraid. Of what? Of losing everything. I closed my eyes. And what do you want from me? I want the truth. I do too. She agreed to meet. We chose the old coastal workshop. When I arrived, she was standing beside the workbench. She was older than the woman in the photograph, but I recognized her immediately. You look like him, she said. I've heard that. She smiled sadly. I always wondered what happened to you. You knew about me. Your father talked about you constantly. That surprised me. He did. He said you're the only person who could look at a broken machine and ask how it could be made better instead of asking who had broken it. My throat tightened. Then why did you leave? She looked toward the window. Because your father took credit for work that wasn't his alone. I said nothing. He didn't steal the entire invention, she continued. but he allowed people to believe he had created it alone. Why? Because investors trusted him. And you? I was willing to walk away. She turned toward me. He wasn't. I looked at the old workbench. So my company exists because of both of you? Yes. Then I won't fight you. She looked surprised. What? I won't fight you. Mara, if you deserve recognition, you should have it. She studied me. Your father would have fought. I know. And Daniel would have fought even harder. I know. She smiled faintly. Then you're neither of them. No. I looked at her. I don't want to build my life by taking something that belongs to someone else. We spent the next several hours reviewing the original designs. By sunset, we had reached an agreement. Evelyn would receive formal co-inventor recognition. She would receive a fair percentage of licensing revenue from the original technology. And Northstar would establish a research foundation in both her and my father's names. There was no lawsuit, no public scandal, no war, just the truth. When I returned to the city, I realized something important. My father had given me the patent, but he had not given me permission to repeat his mistakes. That night, I announced the agreement publicly. The response was enormous. Instead of losing credibility, Northstar gained it. People trusted a company willing to correct its own history. Investors called, hospitals called, researchers called, and Evelyn became part of our advisory board. For the first time, the legacy I had inherited no longer felt like a burden. It felt honest. Then, 3 days later, Daniel called. His voice was unusually quiet. I heard what you did. With Evelyn? Yes. You approve. I don't know if I have a right to approve anything you do anymore. I smiled. That sounds like progress. He laughed softly. Then he said, I need to tell you something. What? The people who took over Halden found records of the transfers Victor made. I waited. Your father had started an internal investigation before he died. My stomach tightened. Against Victor? Yes. And Daniel? He was silent. Then he whispered, against me too. I met Daniel that evening. He looked exhausted, not from losing money, from finally facing the person he had been. I didn't know Dad was investigating me, he said. What did you do? He looked down. I signed documents I shouldn't have signed. Why? Victor told me the company needed liquidity. You trusted him? I wanted to. That answer told me everything. Daniel hadn't been fooled because he was stupid. He had been fooled because he wanted to believe every shortcut would eventually make him successful. Did you steal from the company? He swallowed. I transferred money. How much? He told me. It was a lot, but not enough to destroy the company alone. What happened to it? Victor took most of it. I stared at him. And you? I spent some. On what? He looked ashamed. Things I thought would make me successful. I nodded slowly. Daniel, I can't fix that. I know. The authorities may investigate. I know. You may have to repay some of it. I know. He looked at me. I don't want you to save me. I was silent. I just wanted you to know that I'm finally taking responsibility. That sentence mattered. Not because it erased anything. It didn't. But because for the first time, Daniel wasn't asking me to carry his consequences. I reached into my bag and placed an envelope on the table. He stared at it. What is that? A job offer. He looked confused. For you. His eyes widened. You're offering me a job? Not at Northstar. He looked relieved. Then where? Evelyn's foundation needs someone to manage logistics for its rural clinic program. He stared at me. Why me? Because you're good at logistics. He almost laughed. You still believe I'm good at something? Yes. I stood. But this isn't charity. I know. You'll start at the bottom. I know. You'll report to people younger than you. He nodded. I know. And if you steal anything, I will personally make sure you never work in this industry again. He smiled sadly. That sounds like my sister. I smiled back. That woman used to be your sister. He looked down. I miss her. I know. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked, can I earn her back? I thought about it. Maybe. His eyes became wet, but not by asking me to forget. He nodded. I won't. I left. That night, I went home to the apartment I had bought with my own money. It was small compared with Dad's house, but it was mine. No family portraits chosen by someone else. No rooms filled with memories I was afraid to disturb. Just books, plants, photographs, and a kitchen where Priya had somehow convinced me to learn how to cook. I stood by the window. For years, I had believed freedom would feel dramatic. It didn't. It felt like making tea at midnight without worrying about tomorrow's argument. It felt like sleeping without checking my phone. It felt like waking up and knowing that every decision belonged to me. A week later, I received another surprise. Evelyn invited me to the coastal workshop. She had restored the old building. The walls were repaired. The broken windows were replaced. The workbench remained. She handed me a small metal plaque. "What is this?" "Your father wanted this place to become a research center." I stared at her. He never told me. He never finished the plan. I ran my fingers over the plaque. "What do you want me to do?" "Finish it." I looked around. A place that had once been the beginning of a broken partnership could become the beginning of something new. So I said yes. Northstar funded the center. Evelyn led the research program. I became its director. And something unexpected happened. Young engineers started arriving. Students who had no connections. Researchers who couldn't afford expensive laboratories. People who reminded me of myself. Quiet, capable, overlooked. I gave them what I had once needed. A chance. Months passed. The research center grew. Northstar expanded into several countries. The foundation provided power systems to remote clinics. And Daniel slowly rebuilt his life. He never asked for money again. He never demanded a place in my company. He simply worked. Sometimes he sent me a message. The clinic in the northern district finally got its equipment. Or I handled the shipment without losing anything this time. I would smile, then answer, "Good." It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. It was something better. It was trust being rebuilt one small action at a time. One evening, I returned to the coastal workshop alone. The sunset reflected across the windows. I opened Dad's oldest notebook. On the final page, I found one last sentence. "A legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what becomes possible because you were here." I closed the notebook. For the first time, I didn't feel angry at my father. I didn't feel angry at Daniel. I didn't even feel angry at the woman I had once been. She had done the best she could with what she knew. I was simply grateful that this time, I had learned to choose myself. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. It was Priya. She held 2 cups of coffee. "You disappeared." I needed to think. "About?" I looked at the workshop. "My family." She handed me a cup. "Do you miss them?" I smiled. "Some of them." She laughed. "Fair." Then she became serious. "You know, Mara, you don't have to spend your whole life proving you don't need anyone." I looked at her. "I know. Good." She smiled. "Because some people aren't trying to control you." I understood what she meant. And for the first time, I wondered whether my future didn't have to be defined only by what I had escaped. Maybe it could also be defined by who I chose to let in. Maybe freedom wasn't simply walking away. Maybe freedom was finally having the courage to stay where you were respected. I looked at Priya and smiled. "Coffee." She lifted her cup. "Coffee." We stood together as the sun disappeared behind the sea. And somewhere far away, the last pieces of a life I had left behind were finally settling into the past. 6 months later, my mother called me and asked if I would come home. Not to the old house. That house was gone. She meant the little apartment where she had moved after Daniel lost the company. "I don't want anything from you," she said. "I know. I just want to see you." I looked out the window of my office. Northstar had grown beyond anything I had imagined. But success had taught me something unexpected. The more your life expands, the more carefully you choose what deserves a place inside it. "Okay," I said. "I'll come." When I arrived, my mother opened the door herself. She looked nervous. I almost smiled. "You don't have to be afraid of me." "I know." She stepped aside. "I just don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." We sat at the small dining table. There were no expensive decorations, no family portraits, no reminders of the house we had lost. Just 2 cups of tea. My mother looked at me for a long time. "You really don't hate us." "No." "Ow." I thought about it. "Because hate still ties you to people." She lowered her eyes. "I spent so long thinking you would come back." "I know. After you signed the inheritance away, Daniel said you would regret it." I smiled. "I didn't. I know that now." She reached into a drawer. "There is something I kept." She placed an old photograph in front of me. It was from my childhood. Daniel and I were standing beneath the apple tree. I was holding a broken toy. Daniel had one arm around my shoulders. We were both laughing. I touched the photograph. I remember this. You had broken your toy, and Daniel fixed it. I smiled. He did. Yes. I stare at my brother's younger face. For a moment, I saw the boy he had been before fear and ambition changed him. My mother whispered, I keep wondering where I went wrong. I looked at her. You don't need to punish yourself forever. But I hurt you. Yes. Her eyes filled with tears. And I can't undo it. No. What can I do? I took a breath. Tell me the truth from now on. She nodded. That I can do. We talked for 2 hours. Not about money. Not about the company. Not about Daniel. We talked about ordinary things. Her garden. My work. The research center. The students. It wasn't the old family. It wasn't supposed to be. It was something smaller. Something more honest. When I left, she hugged me. This time, I hugged her back. But I didn't promise I would return every week. I didn't promise to repair everything. I simply said, I'll call you. And that was enough. A few days later, Daniel came to the research center. He looked different. Not richer. Not more powerful. Just steadier. I got promoted, he said. I smiled. Congratulations. It's not much. It doesn't have to be. He looked at the laboratory. Do you know what I finally realized? What? You gave up the inheritance because you knew exactly what I'd do with it. I nodded. You knew I'd destroy myself. I knew you were heading in that direction. He looked down, and you still let me have it. I couldn't stop you from being yourself. His eyes became wet. I thought you were surrendering. I was. He looked confused. I smiled. I surrendered the fight. He understood. Not everything needed to be won. Some things needed to be released. I've spent a lot of time thinking about that, he said. And I think you saved me by leaving. I frowned. That wasn't my intention. I know. He looked at me. But when you stopped cleaning up my mistakes, I finally had to see them. I nodded slowly. That was the truth. Sometimes love didn't mean protecting someone from consequences. Sometimes love meant stepping aside and allowing them to become responsible for their own life. Daniel reached into his pocket. He took out a small envelope. I don't want you to think I'm giving you back anything. I don't. It's just something I found. He handed it to me. Inside was a photograph of Dad. He was standing in the workshop, smiling. On the back was written, My children will build different lives. I only hope they remember they don't have to build them the same way. I stared at it. Then I laughed softly. Dad really did like leaving dramatic notes. Daniel laughed. He did. For the first time in years, we laughed together. Not like children. Not like enemies. Just two adults who had survived the damage we had once caused each other. Before he left, Daniel turned around. Mara, yes. Thank you for not destroying me when you had the chance. I shook my head. I never wanted to destroy you. Why not? Because then I'd still be living for you. He nodded, and this time he understood. A year after I left the inheritance behind, the Coastal Research Center officially opened. Hundreds of people came. Researchers, students, doctors, engineers, community leaders. My mother came too. Daniel stood beside her. Evelyn gave the opening speech. Then she called me to the stage. I looked at the audience, at the building behind me, at the students waiting for their first research projects, at the small plaque mounted near the entrance. It carried 3 names. My grandfather, my father, Evelyn, not because any one person had built the future alone, but because none of us did. I took the microphone. I used to think inheritance meant receiving something from the people who came before us. The audience became quiet. Money, property, a company, a name. I looked toward my mother, but I learned that inheritance can also be a mistake. A few people smiled. It can be a lesson. I continued. It can be a warning. I paused. And sometimes the greatest thing you can inherit is the courage to build something different. I didn't mention Daniel. I didn't need to. The story belonged to my past now. After the ceremony, I walked toward the sea. Priya followed. You were good. I was nervous. You didn't look nervous. I've become better at pretending. She laughed. Then she became quiet. Mara, there's something I've wanted to ask you for a while. I turned. She was holding a small box. My heart skipped. She opened it. Inside was a simple silver pendant shaped like a star. I stared at it. Why a star? Because Northstar was the first place where you finally stopped looking backward. I smiled. That's a dangerous amount of sentiment for an engineer. I know. She took a breath. I don't want to be part of your life because I'm convenient. You aren't. I don't want to be someone you choose because you're afraid of being alone. You're not. She looked at me. Then I want to ask you properly. My heart was pounding. Mara, will you build the rest of your life with me? I looked at the woman standing in front of me. Priya had never asked me to prove my loyalty. She had never compared me with anyone. She had never made love feel like a debt. With her, silence was comfortable. Success didn't make her jealous. Failure didn't make her disappear. She simply stood beside me. And I realized that after spending so many years believing family meant obligation, I had finally learned that love could mean choice. Yes, I said. Her smile broke through her nervousness. Yes. Yes. She laughed. Then she hugged me. I closed my eyes. For once, I didn't think about Daniel. I didn't think about the inheritance. I didn't think about the hospital. I didn't think about the life I had already lived. I only thought about the life ahead. Years later, people would ask me how Northstar became successful. They would talk about the technology, the investors, the research center, the international contracts. They would say I had made a brilliant decision by giving up the family inheritance. But that wasn't the truth. I didn't become successful because I gave up the inheritance. I became successful because I stopped believing that my worth depended on receiving it. Daniel eventually paid back what he could. He built a modest career in logistics. My mother and I rebuilt our relationship slowly. Not perfectly, but honestly. Evelyn continued working until she retired. And the research center became larger than any of us expected. As for me, I kept Dad's brass key. Not because I needed it anymore, but because it reminded me of the moment my life changed. The moment I realized that my father hadn't left me a fortune. He had left me a door, and I had finally found the courage to open it. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had fought Daniel for the inheritance. Maybe I would have won. Maybe I would have taken the house. Maybe I would have kept the company. Maybe I would have spent years proving that I deserved what my father left behind. But I know what I would have lost. My peace, my purpose, my future, and perhaps most importantly, I would never have discovered who I was without my family's approval. So if you ask me whether I regret signing those papers, my answer is simple. No, I don't. Because the day I signed away the inheritance, I thought I was giving my brother everything. I was wrong. I was giving myself the one thing money could never buy. Freedom. Daniel inherited the company. I inherited the lesson. He inherited the house. I built a home. He inherited the money. I built a future. And in the end, I didn't need to destroy the people who hurt me. I didn't need them to suffer. I didn't even need them to regret losing me. I only needed to become someone who no longer waited for them to choose me. I chose myself, and that was the inheritance that changed my life.